Section 7 of Rambles in New Zealand by John Carne Bidwill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Beeswax Candle. These rambles were abruptly put an end to by the increasing business of the mercantile firm at Sydney with which I am connected, and my time and attention became occupied in other pursuits. But soon after my return to Sydney it was determined that I should go again to New Zealand on commercial business, and having resided for some time at Port Nicholson and its neighbourhood, I am, at this time, August 1840, enabled to add many further particulars respecting the country from my own continued personal observation. The Thames, or Waiho River, discharges itself into the Gulf of Hamaki, which contains several harbours, only one of which, however, has been visited by large vessels. This is Coromandel Harbour. It is on the south side of the Gulf and from 30 to 40 miles from the mouth of the Thames and the commencement of the available lands. At the back of the harbour, the mountains rise very abruptly to about 4,000 feet, and there is no passage from thence to the level lands at the head of the Gulf. The land is all quite as steep as that in the neighbourhood of Port Nicholson between Britannia and Thorndon, and the shores so bold and rugged that it is impossible to walk for any distance along them. The only harbour which is worth mentioning at present is Waitemata, the intended new settlement. It is a good harbour, but very little known. When I was there it had never been entered by vessels of any burthen. The land is more level than on the southern side, but the soil is bad and very swampy, and wood for fuel even is very scarce. It is from 30 to 40 miles from the rich level lands which are held out as the inducement to draw settlers to the Thames, and land carriage at present is impracticable. The mountainous land on the Thames is generally covered with timber, but from the rugged character of the country where it grows, its value is greatly diminished, as the cost of its transport to the water would be very great. The timber is chiefly the kauri pine, which always grows in poor, stiff clay soil, very inferior for agricultural purposes to any of the land around Port Nicholson. The river Waiho, or Thames, joins the sea on the south shore near the head of the Gulf. The land is swampy for many miles from the mouth of the river, which cannot be entered by vessels of more than 10 tons burthen. The Thames runs through a level country, free from timber, for about 80 miles from north to south, and with an average breadth of 15 miles. The mountains bound it on the east like a wall. They are the same as I have spoken of as forming the background of Coromandel Harbour. At their termination they are quite perpendicular for about 1/3 from their summits, and the remainder so steep as to resemble an artificial embankment. Although the soil of the tableland is rich and remarkably level for New Zealand, it can never be settled from the plain, because of the utter impracticability of its western face. The eastern slope is more gradual, but until a good harbour is found in the Bay of Plenty, it will be as little use as the other. On the western side there is no such well-defined boundary, but a number of round hills shut in the view. The volcanic ridge of Tongariro closes the view to the southward. I have never reached Tongariro from this route, but I have no doubt the ascent will be found very gradual to the base of the mountain. The Waiho is a river about the size of the Thames at Windsor. It runs with a steady, rapid current, and is generally free from logs and other obstructions. Its average depth is about 5 feet, but it is too rapid to row against. The plain cannot properly be considered as the bed of the river, but a portion of the original tableland through which it flows. The proper valley of the river is about 1/2 mile wide, and is continuous the course of the stream all through the plain. The land is rich and is covered with flax from 10 to 12 feet in height. Scattered at intervals are small groves of tall kaikatea trees, but these spots are so few that the plain in general may be described as perfectly free from timber. There is no doubt in time this will be a fine country, but I cannot help thinking the land around Port Nicholson offers far greater advantages. It is true around the valley of the Hutt the land will cost labour to prepare it for cultivation, but it is undoubtedly very rich, and will make good and speedy return for the outlay upon it. Now the land on the Waiho, which will not cost much money to work, is not better, perhaps not so good as the bare hills to the south of Port Nicholson, and the swampy lands of the Waiho will cost almost as much to drain as heavily timbered land to clear. And as well known, bogs do not immediately become useful land, but that several years must elapse after they are reclaimed before they will bear crops of grain. Footnote: Fully 1/2 of the plain of the Waiho is an impassable bog covered with high rushes, the largest remaining portion poor fernland, and there is a considerable portion of wet stony land covered with rank vegetation without bushes. End of footnote. The Waiho, although a much larger river, is not more useful than the Hutt, as it will only serve for the downward conveyance of produce, for which purpose the latter is equally capable, and in Port Nicholson the farmer has the advantage of his port town close to him, while on the Thames he is from 30 to 40 miles from it, and consequently from his market. The almost total absence of timber on the Thames will also be a serious difficulty to the farmer, as he will, in most instances, be obliged to bring his wood for all purposes from a distance, besides buying instead of cutting it upon his own land. The only advantage the Thames has over the Hutt is its plain, admirably adapted for rearing herds of cattle without the labour of cultivation, and I have no doubt in a few years it will be so occupied from New South Wales by persons accustomed to that kind of employment. But I apprehend few from this place would at present feel disposed to embark in such a speculation. I can say, moreover, from all I have seen or heard of the different harbours of New Zealand, Port Nicholson is by far the best for the settlement of a new colony, not only from its geographical situation, but because the site of the town is much superior to any other that has yet been found in the country, and there is an abundance of excellent land, sufficient for the employment of any amount of population there may be for 20 years to come. At the Bay of Islands it is almost impossible to find a place suitable for the site even of a moderate village, and the country is so rough and broken that there are no means of going from one part of the bay to another by land, and the shores also of the Gulf of Hamaki are more mountainous even than those of the Bay of Islands. At Port Nicholson there is an excellent harbour, a navigable river, the Hutt, a great extent of very rich land, an admirable site for the town, with a population of at present between 2,000 and 3,000 persons, among whom are many of high family connections and respectability from England, who have brought considerable capital with them, and a consequent demand for labour, most of which advantages are not to be found on the Thames, where there are as yet no emigrants, and where it is very certain none will be sent by government, and where the population will be made up entirely from the emigration of doubtful characters from New South Wales, or of fickle discontented spirits from this place. The natives on the Thames have always been known as a very bad set, and those who were here at the beginning of the settlement will understand what trouble an ill-disposed set of natives may give to a newcomer, who has everything to do, and none but these to help him. Port Nicholson has been most wantonly cried down at Sydney by parties interested in other settlements, because they had land there and none here. I saw the other day in the Sydney Colonist a letter from a person they call their Tongariro correspondent. This veracious individual described Thorndon as liable to be washed away by the floods from the hills after heavy rains, which ridiculous nonsense would not be worth noticing, but from the danger of its being believed by persons of having no means of learning the truth. For the situation of Thorndon is, of all the others, one of the most perfectly exempt from any danger from floods. One hardly knows how sufficiently to admire the impudence of the person who could state as truth so visible an impossibility. I think it of little consequence what people in other parts of New Zealand say of this place, as I am satisfied no long period will elapse before it will become, as it deserves, the one of the greatest consequence in the country, its local advantages being greater, and its settlers so much superior in character, education, property, and for every requisite for the final success of a colony to those of the resident Europeans in other parts of New Zealand, that it cannot fail to prosper, if the colonists do not suffer themselves to be deceived and misled into new schemes for further emigration by interested parties, and which they may be sure will do them no good, and only throw them back to the state of discomfort naturally incident to a first arrival in any new settlement. End of Section 7. End of Rambles in New Zealand by Carne Bidwill.